Welcome in, everyone, to the Louisiana Now podcast. I am your host, Todd Rossnagel. It is great to have you along with us. In this episode of the Louisiana Now podcast, our 37th episode of the year, we catch up with Rob Fairley, president of the United Methodist Foundation of Louisiana, which, as you know, is the sponsor of the Louisiana Now podcast. You know, the foundation has been doing some fantastic work in the area of support for Louisiana churches, and they've been doing a lot of background research into the effects of COVID on churches. We're going to unpack all of that and more in today's episode. Just for some background, the foundation exists to serve the Louisiana Conference churches where faith and money intersect. They manage money for the churches of the Louisiana Annual Conference, over $180 million. They promote and manage endowments for churches. They provide loans for churches, and they double tithe their operating income back to the United Methodist Church and its ministries through grants. Their mission to assist has shifted during COVID, as just about everything else on planet Earth has shifted, but their commitment to support hasn't wavered. We began our conversation with Rob with an update on how the foundation is currently operating in the midst of a coronavirus. And my opening question, is everything good?
We're super good. We have continued to operate. Things are still the same. Assets have probably grown somewhat. We have yet to receive our first request on an emergency basis from some church, and I'm not playing with words. We probably have had fewer requests than we normally do during this time. So the foundation is doing fine and is still trying to carry out the ministry that we feel like God gave us to do. And everything is going smoothly to the best of my knowledge.
Well, Rob, that brings me to my first question. Back in June, the foundation conducted surveys to really kind of get an idea of how United Methodist churches in the Louisiana Conference are doing and how they're faring. What was the idea behind those? Why did you want to do those particular surveys?
Well, Todd, it's an old saw and probably was said mostly before a lot of people today were around. But somewhere along the line, I read, if it bleeds, it leads. And I kind of feel like that continues today. The press seems to feel a need to be spectacular and startling and shocking. And so what we hear so much about, I think, is scary and frightening and bad news. I think God warned us a whole lot about fear and not letting it overtake our lives in the Bible. So I think one of the best ways to deal with that type of thing is to get the facts and review them. So in late June, we sent out a survey to all of our, 400 some odd churches in the state of Louisiana and asked a number of questions and got a pretty good response. I'd say we heard from well over 100 churches to give us kind of a feel for their current situation. I would say that certainly nearly half reported doing well by virtue of saying they were at budget or ahead of budget. I think it was 47% to be exactly correct. There were about 10% of the responses that said they were significantly behind what they had hoped to be. I'm not too sure that that's a whole lot different than any year at this time of the year when you're entering the summer season. And the balance between those two numbers were churches who reported being, slightly behind, but not enough so as to cause concern. We also asked them how they felt the future would be, the rest of the year, how they thought it would go. And the numbers got even better. Over half, I think it was 55% of the churches, said they anticipate the remainder of the year to be on budget or ahead of budget. That number of churches that felt they were significantly behind fell from 10%, as I recall, to maybe 8%. None of them reported any kind of distress. We ask other questions like, how are you encouraging people to give? And of course, giving by check is still the number one method. but most churches are being forced to learn more about online giving, and I think they're doing so, and it's growing. The majority of churches said they would have an annual campaign this year. Didn't know that, since we normally think of an annual campaign as an in-person thing, but the majority of them said they were going to do it, the vast majority, and did say they were probably going to change it up a little bit, which is exciting to me. I'd really like to see what those changes might be. I was disappointed that about 13% of the responses came back saying they did not plan to hold a campaign this year. And for the life of me, I cannot imagine why you would deny members of your faith community the opportunity to respond to God's faithfulness with faithfulness of their own. They reported that probably the most significant change they'd experienced thus far was just the method by which they worshiped. And of course, that means they were adding live streaming or virtual or online or whatever term they might use, worship. But I think they all responded in a positive fashion. They were doing that and were surprised at the response they were getting. Churches are reporting twice as many people participating, or 4 times as many, or 5 or 10 times as many as they were used to having come on a Sunday morning. Of course, they also reported the need to having to upgrade their technology and adding staff for communications. I would say the common theme that they reported, well, we're all facing the same issues with this coronavirus, and we're facing it together. So it's forced us to embrace technology, and probably something we should have been doing all along.
Well, I know the foundation has been there to assist churches, been there to support churches. If there has been one theme in the midst of the coronavirus and the foundation, it's been support, not just surveys, but support as well. I want to get to 2 areas of support that the foundation has been there for churches, and quite frankly for pastors too, because I know that that feel like they've been treading water in the midst of the coronavirus. The first thing that I want to talk about with support is the support of the foundation in technological ways. And Rob, I would be willing to bet that when the first organizational board of trustees meeting that you told me about several months ago on this podcast back in 1975, Dr. James Carraway was there. I would be willing to bet he never would have guessed that in the year 2020, you'd be helping churches buy web cameras.
I think you're probably right, although Jimmy loved technology and he loved computers in their very infant stage as he knew them. But I think you're absolutely correct. When this all happened, of course, we were trying to figure out how we could help churches. And we have long ago learned that there are a whole lot more good ideas out there in the churches than there are in our building. So we just asked people what they were doing and how we could help. And we felt the best way to do that would be to offer some money. So we established a $100,000 unique ministry grant and just said, tell us how you're facing this changing environment and what you're doing. The biggest portion of that, as you well know, because we sought your advice to help guide us with this, was how they would worship virtually, how they were going to do this online, what equipment they needed, if any, or if they had some that they needed to upgrade it. And with your guidance and assistance, for which we are most grateful, I think we ended up helping at least 20 churches throughout the annual conference either start with some beginning equipment or upgrade with their equipment. And the stories that we hear, as I say, are just delightful as far as how they're reaching out and how people are responding from across town or across another parish or across the United States. So that was one area, but it wasn't all technology. Again, we proved ourselves correct in knowing that there'd be some neat ideas out there we had not even heard about. And we had ideas such as drive-in church. I'm not saying that might be unique, but it was something we had not come up with. and that needed a little financial support. We also heard about Sunday school in a box, and that was a concept where kits are put together and mailed out to the children, and the pastor follows up with them online, Zooms with them, and works with them with their projects or whatever. Just unique little ideas that they had, but they just need a little help paying for it. We were happy to do that.
The foundation normally holds and hosts a variety of educational events throughout the year, and that desire to educate continues in the midst of the coronavirus. They're just having to pivot and do things a bit differently, and that different comes in the form of online webinars.
So once that team is in place, here's a high-level view, the rest of this presentation, of some core tools of a 2020 campaign.
That is Carl Madison, Director of Giving at the Presbyterian Foundation, one of several guests this month in the Foundation's free webinars. That particular webinar was recorded Tuesday, August 11th, where Carl discussed overcoming the challenges of our current environment to hold an effective fall campaign, how to have compelling themes and messaging, narrative budgets, testimonials, and letters, how to receive pledges, how to invite church members to pledge.
There's so much room for optimism, and I'm thrilled about that, but still a little bit anxious, as many people are, that, we're just over halfway through the year.
That webinar can be found on their website, and you can register for more, as there will be more this month. All can be found on their website at umf.org. Back now to Rob Fairley, who has more on those webinars and what to expect in the coming weeks.
Next week, we've got what I think is a really neat concept. We've been working on it now for several months, but it's entitled Assisting Aging Parents with Financial Affairs. Now, I'm a member of the baby boomer generation. I just recently heard we have been supplanted as the biggest bulge in the population in the United States, but we're still a significant group. And most of us are dealing with or have dealt with this very issue. Now, I have buried both my parents at this point in time, but I too went through that time period where it became necessary for me to become more involved with their finances. And they'd never hidden things from me, but it really wasn't something I dealt with day to day and all the intricate details, but it became necessary. And that happens to, I think, all of us that go through this. So, what questions should we ask? Not be worried about whether or not we're being nosy, but what should we be asking our parents in order to take care of them best? And what happens if you don't plan ahead? Everybody knows about the fact we ought to have a will, although according to the statistics, more than 60% of adult Americans who died last year did so without a valid will. What's the difference between that and a trust? What's going to be better? And there are different kinds of powers of attorney, and which ones should we have? Do we need to know what our parents' interests are and who they would like to name as beneficiaries and so on? So this lady that is leading this is an attorney over on the North Shore, specializing in elder care and estate planning. And I think it'll be just a terrific webinar and great information for everybody to have. That's Thursday, August 20th at 2 p.m. And then the last one here in the month of August is on August 25th. That's a Tuesday at 2 p.m. And it's Encouraging Generosity in Tough Times. We have said for years, if we did our job right, and if everybody truly understood generosity in our faith journey, that it wouldn't require a special campaign at a certain time of the year. Historically, that happens in the fall because that's when all of us used to be farmers and our crops came in and we could give something at that time. Generosity ought to be happening throughout the year, and whether it's good times or bad times. And what we can do as church communities to encourage such, even in these unusual times. So those are the webinars for August, and I hope people take advantage of them. They are free. The audiences are expanding. We're getting requests, even from out of state, and I think you'll find them very worthwhile.
It seems like just a lifetime ago when we last spoke here on the Louisiana Now podcast, Rob. You were our fourth episode. Pandemics were certainly not something we were discussing or even had planned to plan for. But I find it interesting that one of the opening comments of that show, you said that giving enhances our walk with God when we are generous. You decide to give away 20% of your income. You said you better hope someone has your back. How true is that today? How true is it that we need to have faith, and we need to have faith with our money?
Well, Todd, that's a great setup. Thank you for doing that. The reason the foundation went to 20% is because biblically the tithe is generally referred to as 10% of your gross income. And I know we can argue about that, but we thought if we're going to act as leaders, we need to do more than that. So we decided to settle on the 20% of our gross revenues. We'd never done that before. And it was a challenge that we faced. But it was a challenge that evaporated over the course of the first year that we did that. And I've told people this story before. At the end of that year, when we made that commitment, we had given away 20% of our gross revenues, and we had more money left over as a surplus than ever in the history of the foundation. And I think that is true. I think that is how generosity with God works in our lifetime. All of us have stages in life where we make a little money, or we make a lot of money, or we don't make any money. I've had periods of unemployment in my lifetime. And I think that's some of the beauty and wisdom, not surprisingly, that God used in putting all this together. If you commit to give $1,000 a year away and you have good times or bad times, I don't know how significant that is. If you're going to give 10% away, it's always adjustable. You can give 10% away if you're all but going broke. It may not be very much, but it reaffirms your commitment. And if we're here saying that we are going to place God first in our life, first in our thoughts, first in our actions, God should also be first in our finances as well. It has proven to be rewarding to anyone I know who has experienced it or tried it. It has been rewarding to the foundation. It has been rewarding to me personally. And I don't mean just financially rewarding, but how wonderful it is when you're able to help someone or some group of people because of your generosity of the very things that God has given you in the first place. So when we give, we are expressing our faith. And God wants us, I believe, to experience that. Try it. You'll like it.
Rob Fairley, president of the United Methodist Foundation here in Louisiana, and sponsor of the Louisiana Now podcast from day one. Rob, we thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you, Todd.
More information about the Foundation's webinars and how the Foundation can help you and your church can be found at their website, umf.org. We thank Rob for his time, and we thank him and the Foundation for their continued support of the Louisiana Now podcast. If you have a moment, thank us and thank them by doing something really simple. Leave us a review on iTunes and share the Louisiana Now podcast with someone who might want to learn more about the news, opportunities, and witness of the Louisiana Methodists. Thanks again for joining us, and until next time, may the peace of God be in your heart, the grace of God be in your words, and the love of God be in all that you do.